Hey everybody, Maestro here. And before we get into the video, I just wanted to go ahead and give a bit of a disclaimer and an update. So the special weapons video is going to be much longer than I initially expected. So rather than just do one video, this is actually going to turn into a mini series of videos. And we are going to start with episode 1 being about fusion rifles. We have shotguns, sniper rifles, and the rest of these specials coming in later episodes, but I wanted to go ahead and give you a heads up that this will be broken up into parts. So thank you all for the support. I know this has been a long time coming in terms of the video, and I want to thank you for your patience, but I wanted to make sure I took my time with it and made this the best video possible, and to make this one of the better series as possible and make this as best as I can. The support you've all shown has meant the world to me. It's been great, it's been amazing, and it's truly been a blessing to be able to do things like this. So without further ado, I hope you all enjoy, and we will see you in a little bit. Peace. The time is here to talk about everyone's favorite green brick guns. Over the past 4 seasons, we have seen a strong uptick in the use and prominence of weapons that utilize special ammo, and for good reason. An update just prior to the launch of Forsaken came with sandbox changes and changes to the weapon slot system. Shotguns, snipers, fusion rifles, trace rifles, and bridge-loaded grenade launchers became what we now know as special weapons. Special ammo could either be kinetic or energy, and thus opened up a world of options for loadouts in the game. The next big fall expansion, Shadowkeep, would see an exotic hand cannon join that list in Season of the Undying. Now, all these weapon types have had their time in the sun, no pun intended, some longer than others, so let's talk about some of these standouts both for PvE and PvP in each weapon family. Note that this is not an exhaustive list of every special weapon to come out in these seasons, but rather a sort of highlight reel across both sandboxes. Today, we're starting off with the fusion rifles. Fusion rifles are a bit of a curious case, as they've received various tweaks and tunes over these past years, but have still remained damn effective at their job. Year two's Season of the Forge, aka the Black Armory, brought us an absolute monster of a legendary, the Loaded Question. Loaded Question was a Vanguard pinnacle weapon acquired by completing 40 strikes and getting kills with both arc damage and fusion rifles. This high impact fusion came with the perk Reservoir Burst, which granted bonus damage on the first shot of a full magazine, as well as causing enemies killed by this burst to explode. Loaded Question became a mainstay for many players, myself included, as it was great at dealing with large mobs, ad clear, majors, and elites, and it absolutely annihilated anything fallen or anything with an arc shield. At the time of this weapon's release, Bungie hadn't nerfed auto-reload abilities or armor perks on exotics. Loaded Question wasn't necessarily a boss killer on its own, but a fire team with loaded questions and either a Titan's Rally Barricade or a Warlock's Lunafaction boosted Wall of Radiance was putting out beefy damage, thanks to the auto reload allowing constant refresh of Reservoir Burst. Honestly, this was one of, if not the best, Vanguard weapon we received over Destiny's seasonal updates to date, and that may have caused a little bit of an issue, at least in PvE. Loaded Question became a measuring stick for almost all fusions, and for good reason. It was a pinnacle weapon that felt like and performed like a pinnacle weapon. No issues there, but the issue was that for a fusion to be considered good, it had to be just as good, if not better, than Loaded Question, which was a tall order that essentially no other legendary could match. We'd see a variety of strong fusions emerge either as new weapons or reissued with random rolls, and Season of Opulence, aka Penumbra's Menagerie activity, brought us the Epicurean, another high impact fusion. The Menagerie also contained chalice recipes for other random rolled fusions that we'll get to in a moment, but these led to a big surge in fusion usage, especially in PvP. But it is worth mentioning that another solid fusion will still be available in Beyond Light, Main Ingredient. It's a precision frame fusion that many people use to get Loaded Question due to it being an arc fusion with good base stats and a good perk pool. These two were perhaps the biggest standouts in PvE, with the other top tier options coming in the exotic slot. Early on, we had Merciless, an exotic solar fusion that debuted in D2 Vanilla. Its exotic perks conserve momentum and impetus, would consistently lower charge time for every shot that didn't result in a kill, and increase damage for reloading after a kill, essentially an exotic version of Kill Clip. Merciless has received a couple tweaks and modifications from season to season, mainly in regards to its drop rate and its catalyst, as well as the drop sources. But this weapon is going to receive a few buffs and some quality of life changes in Beyond Light, as well as a pretty big bug fix. It's getting more ammo in the reserves, and it's getting a fix for a bug that interfered with the exotic perks triggering and working as intended. This bug actually came from another update where they'd fixed another bug for another exotic, this one being the perk for Polaris Lance. Fixing one problem and finding another happens a lot in the world of Destiny, thanks to some spaghetti code moments. But our next exotic may be the most well-known, most notorious, most memeable example, the Telesto. We can make an entirely separate video about the various glitches and bugs that have plagued Telesto's interactions with Guardians, abilities, and its users and victims both inside of PvE and PvP, and so much so and to the extent that it was even temporarily disabled inside of the game as a whole. But let's just talk about the gun for now. Telesto is an exotic void fusion that came to us in the Curse of Osiris expansion and served as a dual-purpose fusion. The exotic perk Unplanned Reprieve made the bolts from this weapon attach and then detonate, but these could attach to almost anything. Enemies, enemy guardian, surface, terrain, vehicles, you name it. It also had the benefit of reloading your weapons, both itself and your stowed kinetic, from multi-kills, thanks to the perk Harbinger's Pulse. As great as this was in PvE, it absolutely shined just as bright, if not brighter, inside of PvP. Direct kills, denying areas, setting traps, all of that. With the changes made in Forsaken, Telesto became a special weapon and wreaked havoc upon the Crucible. Alongside having a pretty solid range and manageable spread, the sheer amount of damage that this thing could put out also made it a great option for combating roaming supers. Telesto still sees some usage in the Crucible to this day, but not to the extent that it did in Forsaken. But this may change due to weapon sunsetting. As we switch gears to a PvP focus, Forsaken was arguably the peak of fusion rifle usage, with Season of the Forge bringing us another exotic fusion, this one unlocked through an exotic quest, by the name of Jotun. Jotun had the exotic perk Charge Shot, which is exactly what it sounds like. But Jotun's Charge Shot fired a projectile that not only did burn damage on impact, but it tracked targets as well. This perk was active in both PvE and PvP, and it was a great choice for both because it allowed you to engage in one-shot targets at ranges longer than other fusion rifles could reach. While savvy players would play around corners or utilize movement and abilities to get to cover or break the tracking, this thing also ran roughshod in the Crucible and in Gambit, and it was notorious for being a pub and scrub stomper. This thing was very easy to use and pretty much fire and forget. If you weren't shot down before you got a chance to charge it, you were most likely going to trade with someone. These last two exotic fusions made their presence known in the Crucible for essentially all of Year 2. But these were not the only fusions taking up space. Legendary fusion rifles were very strong as well, and Forsaken had 3 legendary high-impact fusions that were most certainly well within the meta. We had the Wizen Rebuke, which came from Iron Banner, the Epicurean from the Menagerie, and perhaps the most well-known and most notorious example, the Aerentil FR4. Now, Main Ingredient, which was a precision frame fusion rifle, was also in the mix because it could roll with good sights, and perks like Snapshot, Liquid Coils, Projection Fuse, Rangefinder, Tap the Trigger, and High Impact Reserves. But so could all of the 3 aforementioned high impact pulse rifles, along with Backup Plan. Good lord, Backup Plan. This perk decreased your charge time and increased your handling after swapping to it for a short period of time without sacrificing the impact damage, like it would with a perk like Accelerated Coils. With all the objectively great perks mentioned above, Backup Plan was the perk on a high impact fusion. Range Masterworks, stability perks, and even further boosting the range with Omalon sights were god rolls for these weapons, and guess what? Save for Rebuke, all of these were farmable in the Menagerie, which had a period of repeated farming from claiming your reward, leaving the boss room, reinserting runes into your chalice, and opening the chest again. Bungie would soon patch this out, but in later seasons, the Menagerie would actually grant 3 bonus rewards for your first 3 runs that week. But let's go back to its initial iteration in Forsaken. You had 3 incredibly strong high-impact fusion rifles with great perks that you could farm repeatedly, and you could control which masterwork stat you got. Hilarity and salt ensued within the community, depending on which side of the fusion you were on, and debates raged constantly about the balance of fusion rifles. Some claimed that their ease of use and high reward overly rewarded lower skill or average players and oversaturated PvP. These weapons also became infamous for being a part of the dad loadout, which was a pulse rifle. At the time, it was obviously Bygones from Gambit, or Blast Furnace from the Forges, and Hammerhead, a solid machine gun from the Forges that had great base stats for range and came with great perks for managing its stability, to the point where people referred to it as a heavy scout rifle. Minus some of the RNG on the perks for the pulse and the light machine gun, these weapons didn't take a whole lot of difficulty or time to acquire, and they were very forgiving and very effective inside of the Crucible. The term came from a joke that dads who played Destiny didn't have much time to raid or acquire pinnacle weapons from the competitive playlist due to raising children, and thus would just go for the easiest to get, but still effective weapons to get the most value out of limited playtime. Again, we can make a whole video about this along with other community terms, especially ones that arrived in PvP, but back to the guns. Now, the biggest points of contention regarding fusion rifles mainly came from the perk backup plan, which admittedly had almost no counterplay whatsoever if you were using it within its effective range and situations. If you were coming around a corner and whoever was behind it was charging up an Erentil, there was essentially nothing you could do about it. The other point was the range. Even with other fusions having access to these perks, Erentil was arguably the best because of its ease of acquisition, as well as having access to those Omalon scopes to further boost its range and its zoom. This thing was absolutely mapping people in the Crucible, and Erentil made sure that the Crucible was Voop City for a long time. These things were just straight up godlike, both on console and PC, and Erentil was running wild. On the other hand, the people who argued for fusion rifles were that they offered a strong counter to another weapon that we'll discuss in the next episode, shotguns. Shotgun rushing, or aping, was still and is very much a common and strong playstyle in the game, especially at the time of this video's release. Shotgunning was one of the best special weapon strats in Destiny, as plenty of players took advantage of perks like Slide Shot, which boosted your range, stability, and even partially reloaded your weapon. And there were also exotic armors like Stompies for Hunters, which boosted both the sprint and slide, or the incredibly polarizing Antaeus Wards for Titans, which had the exotic perk Reflective Vents, which did exactly that. Reflected incoming damage while sliding. You had the argument that backup plan fusions, while having no counter if used correctly, were the perfect counter to shotgun rushers. You could charge up and secure the kill while somebody was attempting to close distance on you, but you could also get the drop on someone coming around the corner by a large margin and put out a lot of damage. Now, at this time in the game, it's important to note that certain shotguns were also very popular in the Crucible, like Dustrock Blues, but also the infamous exotic Lord of Wolves. As strong and arguably as dominant as fusion rifles were, they were inside of a sandbox filled with other very strong options in Year 2. Some of the heavy hitters in Forsaken included the Recluse SMG, another Crucible pinnacle weapon, Ace of Spades, acquirable from an exotic quest, Thorn, Kindled Orchid from the Forges, Luna's Howl and Not Forgotten, again, more Crucible pinnacles, Trust from Gambit, Beloved from the Menagerie, Austringer from the Menagerie, and Spare Rations from Gambit and the Reckoning, just to name a few. Season 6, aka Season of the Drifter or Joker's Wild, was that season focused on Gambit, and brought a lot of these new weapons into the mix, and Opulence made a lot of these weapons that were previously locked to seasonal activities or world drops farmable and thus effectively flooded the PvP market. Eventually, high-impact fusions would receive a nerf after Shadowkeep's launch, specifically in Season 9. Bungie explained that Backup Plan was originally an exotic perk in Destiny 1, and as fusion rifles were heavy weapons prior to the Forsaken update, the perk came with the weapons even after being moved to the special ammo slot. They'd adjusted fusion rifles overall as they received a range nerf. Now, their fall-off floor started from .5, which was down from .75, and the range and impact of the optics, or the scope, was reduced across the board. But there was a slight buff to target acquisition, or the aim assist, which no longer accounted for crit spots, because going for a crit with a fusion rifle could cause most of your burst to miss. However, the nerfs were more impactful than the buff, and for Backup Plan, the perk would not only adjust the charge time of the weapon to match rapid-fire fusion rifle archetypes, but it also lowered the impact of a Backup Plan shot to match the rapid-fire frame as well. Fusions were still good, but Backup Plan was no longer the must-have juggernaut that it was in Forsaken. Shadowkeep saw significant changes to weapons and subclass tuning, most notably the blanket range nerf to hand cannons overall and their precision damage nerf inside of PvE. We also saw the damage buff to 600 RPM auto rifles. This sandbox saw the even further rise of shotguns, lightweight hand cannons, and sniper rifles. Shotguns were slightly adjusted, mainly with regards to their range stat and their aim assist, but more on that in the next episode. Season 9 would also bring us another exotic fusion rifle, the Bastion. This was acquired from an exotic quest involving the Corridors of Time puzzle, which had its own degree of controversy to dive into regarding Bastion's status on the roadmap, as well as its acquisition being a puzzle reward. Bastion was the first kinetic fusion rifle in the game, and much like the other weapons offered this season, came with design motifs centered around the return of legendary titan Saint 14. So here we are, new exotic, first true kinetic fusion rifle in the game, an exotic perk called Saint's Fist that fires a 3-round burst of slugs, and Breakthrough, which can completely bypass shields. Sounds amazing, right? Well, it was great in PvP. It could kill at standard fusion rifle distances and even a little further thanks to the triple shot, and if you were really good or really lucky, you could kill multiple guardians with one burst. It was also great for fighting supers because of that 3 burst doing absolutely huge damage. Aside from that, it filled the role that you'd expect a fusion rifle to fill. Pre-firing, holding corners and angles, great anti-shotgun utility, the usual. Inside of PvE, however, it was relatively lackluster, with the damage from Breakthrough being pretty underwhelming for most orange and yellow bar enemies, and given that this took up an exotic slot, it wasn't a very popular choice. But it did have some utility in Nightfalls, or content where the match game modifier was active. Match game is where shield damage is lowered unless you are matching the element of that shield. Now, most players opted for other guns, as despite the nerf to sniper rifles inside of Shadowkeep, Izanagi's Burden was still soluble for reliable burst damage at range, and was improved by another exotic that we'll talk about in a later episode, as well as a certain high elevation pinnacle weapon. Before we wrap this up, I want to talk about some honorable mentions. First, an outlier that found its way to us in Season 6, and definitely had time to shine in both PvE and PvP. That, my friends, is the Arbalest. Arbalest was the first kinetic linear fusion rifle to appear in the game, and was the first to utilize special ammo. Now, linear fusions are traditionally heavy weapons like Crooked Fang, and this was actually preferred to Bastion in many situations. While it wasn't as great for dealing with match game, it still held its own very well and allowed you to play at longer, almost sniper levels of distance. This was actually a favorite of weapon of mine and a few others in my fire teams and clans during our runs of 0 Hour, the secret mission for Outbreak Perfected. Arbalest was also a pseudo-sniper in PvP, as it could one-shot crit, but it could do massive body shot damage that allowed you to clean up with your primary. Arbalest was my go-to inside of Momentum Control to unlock Komodo, a Crucible ritual weapon, and another traditional heavy linear fusion. Arbalest could either be acquired in Season 6 as a reward during the spring event, the Revelry, in Season 6, which was controversial for various balancing issues with season activity perks being available and active inside of PvP. After the conclusion of the Revelry, you could actually get Arbalest as a random world drop, as it was added to the loot pool. We also got a number of fusion rifles reissued with random rolls in years 2 and 3, namely the Perolium FR3, the Alatha FR4, and the Timeline's Vertex in Season 10. Season 10, with the return of Trials of Osiris, gave us Exile's Curse, a new high-impact fusion available from Trials wins, but notably came without backup plan in its perk pool. We would also see new rifles, Gallant Charge and Hollow Words from Seasons 9 and 11 respectively, but Season 10 and onwards belong to the shotguns. Now, you're probably thinking, hey, wait, you are forgetting the absolute damage god, 1000 Voices. Well, not exactly. It is a fusion rifle, and it's definitely amazing in both PvE and PvP. It utilizes heavy ammo, and at the time, it was an extremely rare drop from the last WIS raid, which is the largest, longest, and arguably most challenging raid in all of Destiny 2. Even at the time of this video, which is being done right before Beyond Light, where Bungie has made raids farmable and increased your drop chances after a certain amount of clears, it's still listed as a rare item on Light.gg's stats. And I can count the amount of times I've been killed by this thing on one hand, and that is even less if I don't count those kills being in the same match. Techian Force and Tempered Dynamo suffer the same fate here. While they are special ammo fusions, they are raid exclusive weapons, and while very solid for PvP, they are not commonly found compared to the other more easily accessible fusion rifles that we talked about previously. So now that we've got all the guns out of the way, here's my thoughts. As good as Loaded Question was, and technically still is, because the imminent weapon sunsetting to occur in Beyond Light, it's not going to have a place in my inventory for anything other than sentimental reasons and the occasional lower level content. It was one of my favorite weapons to use throughout all of Year 2, and still showed up well into Year 3 for mini strikes, menagerie runs with Arc Singe, and all sorts of other content with lots of ad clear. On the grounds of PvP, I think fusion rifles are still going to be good, and definitely have a place inside of both quick play and higher level in-game activities like Trials of Osiris or Iron Banner, and I think the new offerings and exotics are still going to be very strong. I'm actually keeping a few of my Aerentil rolls because I don't play in-game PvP other than Iron Banner, and I think they're still great at countering the massive amounts of shotguns that are in PvP right now. I was definitely a dad loadout player in Year 2, especially during the time I played on console, and I still occasionally pull it out, even after transitioning to PC. Sidearms are also a great option for countering shotguns, but seeing as they're primaries, they don't have the one-hit kill that fusion rifles do, and since everyone's using some kind of special in PvP, the ammo economy is pretty bountiful. When I feel like playing just a tad bit slower and being that mid-range assassin, aka the DeMar DeRozan of Destiny, fusions fit nicely into that playstyle and give me lots of options to play with for my primary. I can pack it with a pulse and go for the dad loadout. I can use an auto rifle. I can use a hand cannon. I'm actually going to be doing a lot of testing to see how Hollow Words, the newest fusion rifle from Season of Arrivals, is going to stack up in PvE, especially with the new perks introduced this season like Killing Wind and Unrelenting. But time is going to tell, and if it will find a way into my PvE inventory for any reason other than being above the power cap and being able to be infused up until the next expansion. Overall, I think fusions are very much in, despite not being the most popular options right now. They're still in the conversation and still strong weapons, but I think that's fine. They have their situations where they shine, as opposed to being a Swiss Army knife, like Loaded Question was. Having absolutely ridiculous weapons has changed our understanding of meta from being the most efficient tactic or the most effective tactic available to the most effective tactic always. This special rules this instead of one special to rule them all should be what we aspire to have from our sandboxes. So, that is all I've got for this one, folks. Next episode is going to feature shotguns. Thank you all so much for watching. Be well, and we'll see you in the next one. Stay safe, and Ovaltine out.